circumstances. But perhaps the most important lesson from this forgotten civilization is that human communities are capable of far more creativity, cooperation, and achievement than we often imagine. When people are united by common purposes and shared challenges, they can create institutions and ways of life that surpass anything achieved by more conventional societies. The children who grew up in these floating worlds possessed knowledge and skills that were unlike anything available on land. They could read the ocean like a book, understanding the subtle signs that indicated approaching storms, hidden reefs, or profitable fishing grounds. They spoke multiple languages fluently, having encountered traders and travelers from dozens of different cultures during their maritime childhood. These young people developed a unique perspective on life that was shaped by constant movement, cultural diversity, and the ever-present awareness that survival depended on cooperation and mutual support. They understood that rigid thinking and inflexible behavior were luxuries that maritime communities couldn't afford. Adaptability wasn't just a useful trait, it was essential for survival. The courtship rituals that developed within these floating communities were elaborate affairs that could involve multiple crews and extended negotiations between families. Young people didn't simply choose their own romantic partners. Marriages were strategic alliances that affected the welfare of entire communities. But this doesn't mean that love and personal attraction were ignored. Successful maritime marriages required both practical compatibility and emotional connection. The engagement process often lasted for months or even years as families evaluated the suitability of potential matches. They considered not just the personal qualities of the individuals involved, but also the resources, connections, and reputation of their respective families. A good marriage could provide access to new fishing grounds, trading routes, or technical knowledge that would benefit everyone. The wedding ceremonies themselves were spectacular celebrations that demonstrated the wealth and status of the families involved. Elaborate gifts were exchanged, including rare goods, precious metals, specialized tools, and valuable information about navigation routes or market opportunities. These exchanges weren't just generous gestures, they were investments in the future prosperity of the newly formed alliance. The honeymoon period for newlywed couples often involved extended voyages that allowed them to visit relatives, explore new territories, and establish their own trading relationships. These journeys weren't just romantic adventures, they were practical education in the skills and knowledge the couple would need to establish their own successful household. The birth of children within these maritime communities was celebrated as a blessing that ensured the continuation of their way of life. Pregnancy was carefully managed to protect both mother and child from the unique dangers of shipboard life. Experienced midwives understood how to handle deliveries in the confined spaces and unstable conditions of ocean-going vessels. Children born at sea were considered especially blessed and were often given names that reflected their maritime origins. These ocean-born youngsters were believed to have natural advantages in understanding weather patterns, navigation, and the behavior of marine life. They often became the most skilled sailors and navigators in their communities. The early education of these children combined traditional Chinese learning with specialized maritime knowledge that couldn't be found in any land-based school. They learned to read and write classical Chinese, but they also mastered the practical skills of seamanship, navigation, and maritime commerce that were essential for success in their floating world. By the time these children reached adolescence, they possessed capabilities that would have impressed professional sailors and merchants in any major port. They could handle complex navigation calculations, negotiate in multiple languages, assess weather conditions, and manage the interpersonal dynamics of crowded shipboard communities. The transition from childhood to adulthood within these maritime societies was marked by elaborate ceremonies that tested the young person's readiness to take on adult responsibilities. These weren't just symbolic rituals, they were practical examinations that demonstrated mastery of essential skills and knowledge. Young men might be required to successfully navigate a vessel through dangerous waters, negotiate a profitable trading deal, or demonstrate their courage in combat. Young women might need to show their ability to manage household finances, resolve disputes between crew members, or organize the complex logistics of a major voyage. Successful completion of these coming-of-age ceremonies earned young people the right to participate fully in adult society. They could marry, own property, vote in community decisions, and eventually compete for leadership positions. Failure meant continued supervision and additional training until they could meet community standards. The career paths available to young adults in these maritime communities were diverse and offered genuine opportunities for advancement based on merit and achievement. Skilled navigators, successful traders, capable administrators, and effective leaders could all achieve positions of respect and authority regardless of their family background. The most talented individuals might eventually command their own vessels, establish successful trading enterprises, or serve as diplomatic representatives to government officials and foreign merchants. The maritime world rewarded competence and innovation in ways that land-based Chinese society rarely matched. But success in maritime communities required more than just individual talent. It demanded the ability to work effectively with others in the challenging environment of shipboard life. People who were brilliant but difficult to live with rarely achieved lasting success, while those who combined reasonable competence with good social skills often thrived. The retirement systems that develop within these maritime communities ensured that older members were cared for even after they could no longer contribute actively to dangerous operations. These arrangements weren't based on charity, but on practical understanding that everyone would eventually need support and that maintaining experienced advisors was essential for community survival. Elderly pirates who could no longer fight or navigate still possessed invaluable knowledge about weather patterns, trading routes, diplomatic relationships, and the complex social dynamics that held maritime communities together. They became teachers, counselors, and keepers of traditional wisdom that couldn't be learned from books or formal instruction. The medical care available to aging members of these floating societies was often superior to what existed in land-based communities. Ship doctors understood the specific health challenges faced by people who had spent decades at sea, and they developed treatments for conditions that were rarely seen among landlubbers. The respect accorded to elderly community members reflected the practical value of their accumulated wisdom. Their opinions carried significant weight in important decisions, and their blessing was often sought before major undertakings. This wasn't mere tradition, it was recognition that experience and judgment were crucial assets in the dangerous world of maritime life. The death of respected elders was mourned by entire communities, not just immediate family members. Funeral ceremonies were elaborate affairs that honored the deceased, while ensuring that their knowledge and wisdom were properly transmitted to younger generations. These rituals weren't just emotional expressions, they were practical measures for preserving cultural continuity. The burial practices used by maritime communities were adapted to their oceanic environment. Traditional Chinese customs required burial in ancestral lands, but people who spent their entire lives at sea couldn't always return to their family origins. Instead, they developed water burial ceremonies that honored the deceased while acknowledging their permanent connection to the maritime world. The seasonal migrations that governed maritime life created annual rhythms that connected far-flung communities across vast stretches of ocean. Families and crews that might be separated for months would reunite during favorable weather periods, sharing news, conducting business, and maintaining the social bonds that held their civilization together. These reunion periods were intense social occasions that combined business negotiations, matchmaking, dispute resolution, and cultural celebration. Communities used these gatherings to exchange information about new opportunities, coordinate future activities, and resolve conflicts that had developed during periods of separation. The festival celebrations that marked these seasonal gatherings were spectacular displays of maritime culture and prosperity. Entire fleets would converge in protected harbours, creating temporary floating cities that rivaled major land-based ports in size and activity. These events weren't just parties. They were essential institutions that maintained unity within the scattered maritime world. The competitive events that took place during these gatherings served multiple purposes beyond entertainment. Sailing races tested the speed and handling of different vessel designs, while